Welcome. I'm Travis.
And I'm Tyler, and this is Strategies for Success, a show that explores many topics while aiming to equip listeners with simple and practical lessons you can use in your everyday life.
Now join us on our journey as we reach for the impossible. Hey guys, it's Trav.
It's Tyler. So today we got a very special episode. A lot of times I think people, we all fail to share our testimony, share our story. And I've heard this from Travis a few times, and I've been at different churches and stuff where people, it's their first time hearing it. I can just see how it really hits home with them. And, you know, basically every time I hear it, it hits home with me, and I've heard it a lot of times. So I think it's very important that we share our stories, and Travis has got a really good one to share with you guys.
You know, this is being really open with you guys, and just you can see behind the curtain and see the real story. So as we've told you before, I do boys ministry, help around the state, help churches get started. And how did I get to doing that? Well, I had helped for many years with our local church, but I just really had felt the burden. Our state had let the program kind of dwindle down, and there was uncertainty about what was going to happen, how it was going to look in the future, and if it was even coming back. And I just felt such a burden. I felt God get a hold of my heart. And I wrote this letter, and I wrote to our network office about the importance of boys ministry. And I really never thought anything else about it, except I just felt such a burden to write that letter. And it wasn't too long after that I had got asked to come and for a meeting. And when we first met, I met with the kids pastor here in Oklahoma, and he asked me just to share what I was thinking. And I shared my burden in my heart about making sure that we're taking time to mentor and discipleship the next generation of young men. And I know that it must have spoke to him, because he stayed in touch and kept talking with me. And I didn't know where this was going to go, but they had said, if you want to work with this program, you've got to be a licensed minister. So I went through all the training, and I've got my ministry credentials with the Assemblies of God. And while this was all going on, I had no idea how this was going to end up. And I just felt like God tugging on my heart. And so at this point, you're probably asking yourself, so, okay, Travis he's a preacher. Well, I'm actually a tractor dealer, as you guys know, and God just got a hold of my heart. And I like to bring that out, because I want you guys to know that it don't matter whether you're doing a business, whether you're, working at a store, maybe it's a major retail outlet, whatever. God has a plan for your life, and it might just be witnessing or reaching to that person right across the counter from you or your fellow employees. So, with everything that has been going on here in our country, I just felt challenged to share this with you guys. And I didn't know how this was all going to turn out, and I was just distraught that we didn't have this boys ministry program. And I went to a camp with my son, and one of the evening services, there was a message, and the guy said, listen, he said, God has called you. And I was up front, and I was praying, and I was saying, God, if this is really what you want me to do, literally in the moment. And right as I finished, this message came forth, and he said, God has called you. He showed you the way to go. He's going to open doors in front of you. He's going to meet people. You're going to meet people that you never thought you would meet. Doors are going to open like never before. And I've trained you and showed you the path to go. And I honestly, I had goosebumps, and I was like, God, I understand. So I started praying. I started getting serious about this. I started staying in touch with the network more frequently about what are we going to do about boys ministry, and trying to do it in a diplomatic way, but with a sense of urgency. And I remember as this was all kind of coming together, they said, hey, would you be interested? Our network said, would you be interested in being the Oklahoma boys ministry coordinator? And I'd never thought about that. I'm a tractor dealer. And I said, I felt like God was leading me in this path, and I think that's something that I would like to do. And in the middle of this, I know we've shared this before, but this is when I got word that my nephew, Davey, had been killed in Haiti. And it just left me so distraught, not really discouraged, but so upset that it hurts so bad. I've lost grandparents, and I've lost loved ones, but never someone that just shook me to my very core. And Davey and Natalie, his wife, and Jude, it hurt so bad and caught me by such a surprise. I almost like I didn't know if I could breathe. And my dad had advised me to come out to my shop, and he said, get alone with God and spend some time in prayer and just cry that stuff out, man. Do not hold those emotions in. And I had been getting ready in preparation. I'd put a map up of Oklahoma. I've got our little studio that we use out here. It's kind of like the ranger room, and it's where we do boys ministry. And I came out here and I was sitting in the chair and I was bawling and I was crying. And you ask all the questions when something bad like this happens, like, God, why would you let this happen? Why did you do this? You know, and God didn't do this, and God didn't let it happen, and God was still in control. But it's all the questions that you want answers to that you can't seem to find. And I remember sitting in the chair and I was crying. I was reading my Bible. I was reading texts from my nephew, and I was going back through there, and he had texted me and said, hey, I was listening to your sermon that you preached at the church the other day, and I had spoke at our church. Not much of a preacher. I'm more of a storyteller, but I had shared this message, and I didn't even remember the message, but it said, I like the way that you tell stories, and your personal stories are applicable. And in this message, I had texted him back, and I said, hey, just remember every day to pick up your sword and get in the good fight. And I don't know, when I read that, I'm the one that texted, but when I read it that night, it was like that it just hit me with a fervency and just a passion. When I opened my eyes, I felt like God spoke to my heart, and not in an audible voice, but it was impressed upon me that there was this map of Oklahoma on the wall, and it said, that's your mission. Davey, Natalie, Jude, they completed their mission, but your mission is the boys and churches right here in Oklahoma. And I try to tell this story without getting choked up. It's very emotional, and I just felt like it was time to share it with you guys, with our listening crowd. But as I shared this, as I walked out of my shop that night, I felt this urgency to pick up my sword and get in the good fight. So the next day at work on Saturday is a slow Saturday. I thought I was just curious, what was the sermon that I had preached? So I went back and looked, and it was about David and his mighty men. It's at the end of 2 Samuel, and it's telling about all the great victories that David had and all these mighty men. And it said that there was these three mighty men, and I preached on a sword, a spear, and a garden hoe. And the one that just stuck out to me was a man named Eleazar. And Eleazar was one of David's mighty men. And it said when the people of the city saw the enemy coming, that they fled before the enemy. And it said that Eleazar went to the gate and he fought. And he said the Lord wrought a great victory, not Eleazar, but the Lord wrought a great victory because he was obedient to God. And he said that he held that sword and fought with such an urgency and just courage that he held that sword so long that he couldn't let it go. And man, it started to hit here. I felt like the Lord had spoke to me to pick up my sword and get in the good fight. I had read that text, and now here I am listening to my own words come back to me. And I guess I'm a slow learner, wondering if God was really speaking to me, you know. And I got to church the next day, and a good friend of mine, he's a woodworking guy and does carpentry work, and he said, hey, Trav, I made you something to take to camp to give to the boys. And so I'll get with you after church. Didn't think too much about it. After church, I went out, and he opened his trunk, and it was just a trunk load of wooden swords. So they're sitting around my shop in here, and it was take these swords and hand them out to the boys. And it hit me right there in the moment. God, I get it. It's time to pick up my sword and to get in the good fight. And I went to camp, and some more details that came out about what happened in Haiti. And I was just really distraught, and I was trying to be positive and upbeat for the boys, making sure they had a good time at camp. And I was talking to some of my friends, and that's where it's great to have mentors and friends that came around me. But this man came up to me out of the blue, all the way from across the country, doesn't know me, never met him before. And he said, I want to talk to the Oklahoma guy, the guy that's just starting to take over Oklahoma. And this was just starting to transpire here in Oklahoma. I had finally accepted. I'd prayed about it and accepted it. And I didn't know what it was going to look like. And this guy comes up, and his name is Wes Kilcrease. And he comes up and he says, hey, he said, God told me to be praying for this guy in Oklahoma. And he goes, I guess that's you. And he said, I want you to know that when you start reaching for the next generation, the enemy is going to fight you like never before, because he sees the value of that. And God is calling men to step up and reach for the next generation, because God knows the value of that as well. And he said, I felt like I need to tell you, it's time to pick up your sword and get in the fight. And when he told me that, I started bawling like a little baby. I was thinking, this guy don't even know me. Sometimes people wonder if God speaks to you. And when people ask me that, I wonder if they're listening. And how do we listen? We read our Bible. We have mentors, hopefully godly mentors around us, and people that we can speak to. And when every time God's ever dealt with me in my life, that it just keeps coming back with a consistency, just like pick up your sword and get in the good fight. And I'll share this with you. I had shared this at a couple churches, and there was churches that had said, "Hey, we don't have any men." And I want you to think about this with me and see if it hits you like it hit me. Churches from all the way from 100 all the way up to 1,000. Okay. And actually it was one with 1,000 that told me this, but they said they didn't have any men that, their church didn't have men that wanted to help with the boys. And I was thinking, dear God, if we have a church, even if it's a church of 50, and we don't have any men to reach for the next generation of boys to be godly mentors, what are we doing? I mean, that's what it's all about right there. That's the next generation of fathers, dads, businessmen, godly businessmen, pastors, next generation of leaders. And if we're not leading these men to reach for these boys, then we've failed. And so Tyler challenged me to start sharing this story at every one of the churches that I go to. And as we challenged this church that Tyler was at, when I shared this the first time, he had said he had a couple guys, but they were growing. I think they had 11 boys. And he said, "We've only got 2 men and we really need more men. I'd like you to challenge the men." And so I went and shared this, and I've got these little metal swords. They're used as bookmarks, but you can put them on a keychain, a necklace, whatever. And I always challenge the men, if you're ready to get in the good fight, come back and see me after church and I'll give you a sword. And every church that we've been to, there's been a line of men back there that are just lining up to get in the good fight. And it encourages me. And I wanted to challenge you guys to get in the good fight.
Yeah.
Tyler,
Yeah.
I mean, can you tell, you encouraged me to share this. I mean, what was your thoughts when you heard it?
Well, I guess I knew a lot of the story because I'd heard it maybe in bits and pieces. And obviously I was involved in our family passing away, so I knew that part of the story. But I think the way that when you shared it, the entire thing with people, it really just relates to people. It lets them, show that God can use me. He used the guy that wasn't even in ministry, super involved in ministry. I mean, he was always involved, but I wasn't what he did all the time, but used him.
I wasn't
to reach
a ministry leader.
Right. Yeah. Used him to challenge all these men across the whole state. I mean, I just think it's been really awesome to see the progress that's been made. But I think a lot of it, I think a lot of times when you go speak somewhere, or if I go listen to someone speak, if I hear them tell their story about how they came from basically a low point to get to where they're at, that's what shows. If you start at the top, then it's kind of a little bit harder for me to respect someone, I guess. And that's probably not very great to say, or maybe not respect. It's hard for me to relate to them, I guess, because you're thinking, hey, this is, this guy's he just fell into that position or something. But to hear the entire story, to hear how he was questioning this at the beginning, but also questioning it along the way, trying to get confirmation for God, and how God just handed to him 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, just kept having people use the same words.
I know I've talked to a lot of men. They're like, I've messed up a lot, man. I'm not the guy that needs to be leading these boys. You're exactly the guy that needs to be leading these boys, because you're in church and you've made things right. God's forgiven you, and you need to be the example to those boys to say, hey, look, we all make mistakes, but God has a plan for each and every one of us.
And I think a lot of times people say that, men or women. But look back to the Bible. Who did God, other than Jesus, did God use anybody that was perfect to further his kingdom? Oftentimes quite the contrary. Most of the time it was some of the worst of the worst. And that's how people knew it was so awesome, is because, Paul was killing people. And that's just one example, but think about how these people were known for bad reasons, and then all of a sudden their life is totally changed. I mean, that's something you can get on board with, rather than, just being mellow the entire time.
I was challenged coming back from this Maxwell event, that almost like I could see through that, like the Bible says, that glass darkly, that the person that God would like me, that the potential, I should say, of who I can be. And I prayed and prayed. I'd been praying for inspiration, and we're not going to end today with a challenge. I'm going to share something with you, but I've been working on a book called Get in the Good Fight. It's going to be more like a study guide, but to just challenge men. It's nothing fancy. I'm not a book writer, but we'll be sharing when that comes out, probably end of October, 1st of November. We're getting pretty close with it. And then I've got a song as we wrap up here today that I want to play for you, Tyler.
There's one other story. So, Travis, I'd like you to share the story. At this Maxwell conference that we went to, we had to give about a 3-minute speech, and it was a little bit overwhelming at first because they said, you say, what do we give this speech about? And they say, whatever you want to.
Yeah.
And that is a lot of choices right there. So to think about, am I going to go serious? Am I going to go funny? I mean, they gave us some examples, but just I was trying to think about something that would be unique and doesn't just sound like everybody else. But Travis and I, we went to this conference together. When we got there, we actually got assigned to different tables, and there was probably 6 to 8 people at each table. But I actually think that was a powerful thing because it forced me to get out of my comfort zone. And, I don't know how Travis feels about that, but I think it was good because we weren't just talking to each other. We were talking to people, and we had people from different states and people from different countries. I know Travis did, but all that to say, we had these speeches we had to give, and Travis shared the condensed story of this, and I'd just share that story with them.
So I had a gentleman from the Dominican, a gentleman from Australia, a men's minister. There was a couple ladies at the table, and I'm going to be completely open. When I first got ready, I was like, this is a business meeting. I don't need to share this, but I just could not get away from it. I'm like, this is what I got to share. And so I took some of those little metal swords, and when I got done giving the speech, it was timed to 3 minutes. And that was the hardest part, is fitting this condensed into 3 minutes. But I gave those men a sword. And when I saw those men later throughout the conference, they would show me that they still had their sword. And then when we took a group photo, or with one of the other guys, they took a photo around the table. And one of the guys from Australia, he said, wait, I ain't taking my picture till I get my sword out. And that was 2 days before.
Yeah, they gave us these coins, Maxwell coins.
Yeah.
Didn't you say, get your coin out? And he said,
yeah, I said, I'm going to get my coin out. And he said, well, I'm going to get my sword out.
Yeah. Yeah, really, we could talk about this for a long time. There's a lot of stuff, but there's a couple other things I think are important if you would share them. So when at this church we went to, talking about when Travis shared this story, I think Travis said he's a good storyteller. He's a very good storyteller, but he's pretty humble about it. But he told the story about, the whole reason we do this is to reach boys, to empower men, to be leaders for these boys. And to get people saved. I mean, that's the whole reason we're doing what we're doing. So Travis shared a story about when they went to camp one time and a boy was having a hard time. So this was an extremely powerful story when I heard this, and I've heard it multiple times, but it's powerful every time.
This story, I mean, it touches me now. And I mean, there was a young man that came for several years, and it was like that one that you just don't feel like you're ever reaching. And he was very bitter, and he had a lot of brokenness in his family. And I could tell that he just did not want me to penetrate through to where we could be friends. And with a lot of these boys, after you spend time with them, become that mentor, and they're on this journey of discipleship with you. They open up and share things, and that's part of being a mentor. But this boy never really did. And he told me he was tough. I want to go to leadership camp. So we loaded up the church van, and we headed off to North Texas to leadership camp. And it wasn't like, an hour down the road. It was 4.5 hours down the road. So when we get there, he realizes, oh my goodness, I got to turn in my phone. No Wi-Fi. I have no video games. It's hot, North Texas. It was in June, and
it's hot.
Yeah, it was real hot. And he was like, I don't want to be here. And I was like, well, I'm sorry, man. It's not like I can take you home. You can see if your dad, I guess, wants to come get you. Of course, his dad wasn't going to drive 4.5 hours to get him. And so we went along through the camp, and I knew one of the guys that was in his group, one of the men that was the leaders. And in this leadership camp, it's a tough couple days, and then they accomplish. I think his group was building rafts, and then they race out across the lake with these rafts. And so the first few days are hot. The teams do not function very well, and it's a really cool experience because toward the end of the week, these groups of just unruly boys become one fluid team in each group. It's really cool. And so when they were down in the water, he had lost his glasses. And when it came to the evening service, it was their spiritual service. It was their kind of wrap up. It was Friday night. The camp ends on Saturday, and he disappeared out of his group right after the service. And the leader that I'm friends with, he went and thank goodness he was very observant, and he saw that he was gone. And he followed the boy and found him, headed to the lake, and caught him right before the boy got in the water. So, kind of paint a picture for you. This boy was going to go into the lake looking for his glasses that he had lost in the dark with no one down there. I mean, very dangerous. And I thank goodness again that there was an observant leader. And so I'm up with my group that is the last year group. It's the boys that they're on their fourth camp and they're earning their sabers, their leadership sabers. And I see this leader and he looks over at me. He comes up to the door and he gives me the finger to come outside. And I was like, come on. So I go out there and I was like, oh man, something's going on. And I see this boy and I know right then that there was a problem. And so he said, hey, listen, he goes, this boy snuck away from his group. He knew that was against the rules. And he's like, we need to talk about this. So we sat down at a table. And as we're sitting at the table, I just felt inspired to share this with him. And I said, young man, I said, you've been coming to our church for a long time, but I said, I don't really think the problem's about you sneaking away from the group or the bad attitude you've had this week or any of this stuff. I don't think that's the problem. I think what the problem is that you don't know Jesus as your Savior. And it didn't even feel natural for me to even say this as I was saying it. I just felt like I needed to. And he started crying, and it was so powerful, but he started crying and we started praying with this young man. And I've never experienced, I've been in church my whole life. When he got done praying, he was laughing and crying at the exact same time. And he goes, I got to go make it right. And he got up and he ran across the camp to his fellow compadres that were back there. And he's like, I'm so sorry for having a bad attitude. Apologized to his camp leaders. The next day, he wrote a letter of appreciation to his camp leaders for having a bad attitude and how much love that they had shown him. And one of the men was crying in that group, the guy that I know. He's like, I've never had a boy write me a thank you letter in 20 years of doing this. And he's like, this means the world to me. And I shared it with the men's group that morning for devotion. And one of the men started crying. He goes, I'm buying that boy a new pair of glasses. And it was just amazing. It was like the New Testament when Jesus came on the scene and the blind man received his sight. It was a complete change in attitude. He got saved. It was like a whole new boy. We got home and his dad's waiting on us, and I had to tell his dad, I'm sorry he lost his glasses. And I can't believe he lost his glasses. And then I reached in my pocket and pulled out like $180 or whatever that was given me. I said, but here's for a brand new pair. And I told him, I said something along these lines, but I said, he lost his glasses, but he got his sight restored, and it wasn't in his eyes. It was in his heart. He's been saved. And I said, I'm going to let this young man share this with you. And I could tell that it touched his dad, but it was so impactful. And Tyler, do you care if I share one more story?
Yeah. I'll see if I was going to have you share another one. We'll see if it's the same story.
Which one were you talking
about? The boy that moved away.
Well, I'm going to have to share two now. So we had this guy in our church that was an older gentleman, and I was needing a helper. And I went to the pastor, said, I need another helper. We're getting to where we got more boys coming. And he said, man, you need to go back there and you need to ask Vernon. And I thought, you know what? Vernon is in his 80s. These boys are going to drive him nuts. How am I, a 30-year-old guy, going to be able to communicate with this 80-year-old man? I'm not seeing this work. And so that was my first thought. Again, Tyler's already said this, but when God calls somebody, he isn't calling the people that are perfect for the job. He's calling the people. It's more than able. They're available.
And keep talking about John Maxwell, but he said another thing that stuck out to me. He said, God blesses you with what will flow through you. So I think at the time he was talking a little bit about financial stuff and blessing others with that, but it also relates to skills, gifts, talents, abilities, everything. As God blesses you with something, you need to let that flow through you and bless others.
Absolutely. So I went to this guy after praying about it, and Pastor kind of convinced me of it. And I kind of got over myself, and I went back there and I said, hey, Vernon, I wanted to see if you'd be willing to help with Rural Rangers. And this still, it's so powerful to me because I was there in the moment, and I didn't know Vernon that well. But he looked at me, and he started crying, and he goes, I thought God was done with me, man. He goes, my wife passed away, and I thought God was done with me. And he goes, I've been praying every day, God, if you still got something for me to do, just have somebody ask me. And Vernon helped for 2 or 3 years in our group, was such a great mentor. He knew leathercraft. He is a pilot. He shared so much stuff with those boys. Not too long ago, we had to retire his tomahawk ceremony and put it on the wall, and had his family come up there, and it was so powerful. You never know who's going to be the one, that the next person to step out. And I'm encouraging you, because here I am, a tractor dealer. Here was Vernon, thought God was done with him. God has a purpose for each and every one of us. Tyler had asked me about the young man.
Yeah.
So that was the young man. I've shared this many times, but I was challenged to ask if people had heard about Jesus. And so I felt ashamed, because this boy had been coming for 6 weeks. And finally in the middle, I thought, you know what, I'm going to ask. And so after our devotion, I said, anybody in here like to hear more about Jesus? And this boy raised his hand, and we prayed with him, and he got saved, and just great things started happening. I could see that it was a life-changing event. And then the day come when we found out that it was time that Vinny was part of the foster system, and he was going back to live with his dad. And his dad lived in Dallas, and it was pretty upsetting. And me and my oldest son, Trevor, we met with him, but we were excited for him, but we were going to miss him. And so we gave him a challenge coin for boys ministry. And we said, look, you've got a brotherhood here in Collinsville, Oklahoma. No matter where you go, we're going to be there. And it's a brotherhood all across the country. And then we showed him how to use the locator to find boys ministry around Dallas. And then we said, but more importantly, you're part of a bigger brotherhood, which is a brotherhood of Christ. And no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, you can always call on Christ. Well, 6 to 9 months go by. Easter, I'm out chasing the Easter bunny around, helping the kids do Easter egg hunt. And his foster family comes up and they said, hey, I wanted to let you know that you guys had an impact on Vinny like you'll never understand. I said, well, thank you for sharing that. And I just kept on what I was doing. And they grabbed my arm and said, no, you don't understand. One of you guys gave Vinny this coin and told him what it meant to be part of a brotherhood, of the brotherhood of boys ministry, of Rangers, and also of a brotherhood of Christ. And he said, Vinny told all this to his dad, and his dad has never been to church. And he said, for the first time ever, Vinny and his dad are attending church in the Dallas area together.
And that goes to teaching the men to be leaders to the boys, but also the boys to be leaders. In this case, the boy was leader to the man. But one other thing I'd like to share. So
Yeah.
Travis had mentioned in the past he's got this map of Oklahoma on his wall, but it's been pretty amazing. One thing that's awesome about Travis is that, like the saying says, excitement sells. So when Travis gets into something, he is completely bought into it. So when he goes around to these places, it's not like he gets up and gives a lecture where that's boring. He gets up, has a lot of activity, involves the people there that he's doing these trainings with, but he gets the men bought in and he gets the boys bought in. And so God has really been able to use him and the entire boys ministry program to spread this ministry to a lot of other churches. So would you share kind of some of the numbers that God's been able to roughly? I mean,
So
it's been a lot of churches.
When we started, this is crazy, but I'm going to have to stop and update this map, because we've added 2 churches this week. And you start doing that every week, it's hard to keep up with these kind of numbers. And I mean, Jenny, my wife, has been praying that God would just have men rise up in these local churches. And I've been getting calls in the last few weeks of pastors and men calling saying, hey, I really felt challenged to reach the boys. I didn't even call these people. These were churches just above and beyond the ones that I've called on. And then there was ones that were doing Rangers, but no one even knew that they were doing boys ministry at all. But when they all of a sudden they heard another pastor talking about that, we got to get revamped. We got to get going again. So when I first sat down with our network, they said, hey, we've got 4 churches that are chartered. That's the guys that are on the locator. That's just renewed. And so there's a few of those numbers that are on there. They're redoing the way that they're tracking this. But we were up over 30 churches that were actually chartered. And we are approaching 80 churches that are actively with boys ministry. And I would love to see, and I know it's not about the numbers, but I would love to see 100+ churches by the time Christmas or the end of the year rolls around. So approximately 4 churches that we knew were doing it, and approximately probably 20 that were actually doing it. And then now we're at 80 pushing 100 in a year.
Yeah. I was going to say, let's put this in perspective. This has been about a year.
And it's, again, this was not something I did. God put that passion on my heart, said, go out and reach these men, to reach these boys. And Tyler's a pretty humble guy too. Tyler has partnered with me and said, look, I can't go every time, but if I can help give an offering to share with these churches to help get them going. And so with guys like Tyler that have came in right behind me, and there's been men all across the state of Oklahoma that have stepped up. And I appreciate every one of these men that have mentored, encouraged me, jumped in the car, traveled, helped set up. I'm not going to mention names because I'll forget somebody, but I appreciate each and every one of those. So guys, instead of a challenge, I felt like the Lord really put on my heart about writing this book, and also about a song, and the words kind of just came to me. So we want to end our episode today with sharing this song that we're going to start using as we reach men.
We're all the real men, the warriors of the faith. A young boy's heart is wandering, and all he needs is someone to point the way. It's time to go to war now, time to raise up a generation of truth. So let's teach them to pick up their swords, teach them how to fight, and get in the good fight. Don't stand on the sidelines. It's time to grab your sword. The enemy's advancing and he's marching on. So let's prepare for battle. God needs a man to grab a sword in his hand and get in the good fight. Say that you're a good man, but that's not enough. You have to be a godly man, 'cause if you're not, then you're just giving up. Get your house in order and start leading them the way that you should, 'cause we have to win the battle or we'll lose the war. Get in the good fight. Don't stand on the sidelines. It's time to grab your sword. The enemy's advancing and he's marching on. So let's prepare for battle. God needs a man to grab a sword in his hand and get in the good fight. Get in the good fight. Our nation has lost focus on what God planned for us to do. We've turned inward. We've turned inward and forgotten the truth. The enemy is winning, 'cause we can't put ourselves aside. So don't sit on the sidelines. Don't sit on the sidelines. Get in the good fight. Get in the good fight. Don't stand on the sidelines. It's time to grab your sword. The enemy's advancing and he's marching on. So let's prepare for battle. God needs a man to grab a sword in his hand and get in the